Eden Prairie City Government before each City Council meeting. Typically, our council meetings are held the first and third Tuesdays of each month from 6:30 to 6:55 is the open podium portion. If you wish to speak at open podium, please contact the City Manager's office at 9498412 by noon of the meeting date with your name, phone number, and the subject matter. If time permits, after scheduled speakers have spoken, I will open up the floor to unscheduled speakers. This portion of the meeting is not recorded or televised. Again, if you have any questions about it, please call the City Manager's office at 9498412. Is there a motion to approve the agenda and other items of business?
Move approval.
Second.
Any items to pull or add? Any changes at all?
Mayor, there's one item from the consent agenda we need to pull tonight.
Okay.
If you look at E, adopt resolution approving final plat of Hellman Edition, we may need to go back and do an administrative subdivision and put this on a future agenda. So if we could just pull item E and table that item to a future council meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. All right. All in favor of the agenda as amended?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes from the City Council workshop held on Tuesday, July 16th?
Move approval. Second.
Any items to correct? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. I'd like a motion for approval of the minutes from the City Council meeting held the same date.
Move approval.
Second. Any items to correct there? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. Is there a motion on the consent calendar?
Move approval. Let's see.
Minus E.
Minus E, and so, Espresso, are we? Do we need to formally table it?
No, I don't think you need to formally table it. Just removed, and the staff will bring it back as appropriate for administrative subdivision.
Don't move again.
Second.
Any items to question or discuss?
I do have a question
Sure.
on something.
Go ahead.
The Home Depot Garden Center was in front of us last fall, almost a year ago. And I just had some questions about, had there been any changes with that since we saw it? And if so, what? And are, in fact, some of the things promised, like the no loudspeakers outside and stuff, is that a part of this and will it stay a part of it? So, it was fine when it left us, but it's been a while. So what's the status on it briefly?
Councilmember Nelson, City Council, there has been a change. Since this was last before you in November, the proposed 7,300 square foot addition of the garden center has been reduced to about a 4,600 square foot addition. And so obviously this was in Home Depot's hands for a while. The ball was in their court. So they've since reduced the proposed expansion. All other elements are the same. Screening of the truck business was an important issue with the council, as was the concern with the speakers and the noise. I think it was actually between when this first came to you, you continued this item to a future meeting where you then approved it for first reading. Management of Home Depot discussed how they have taken measures to take away any concerns with the loudspeakers. It's my understanding that that is not a concern, and it's still not a concern any longer. We'll follow up. But the one change would be actually a little less of an expansion at the garden center, and everything else is the same.
Well, the truck rental location is different, isn't it?
Between the original proposal and what you approved, I believe it is the same. It's still behind the screen behind the garden center area.
Okay. All right. Is that okay?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's just...
All right. All in favor of the consent calendar without item E?
Aye.
Motion passes. Brings us to our first public hearing, which is an amended feasibility report for Eden Prairie Road South of Riley Creek and utility improvements. Mr. Getchow.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. You may recall, again, this was an item that was last before you November 20th, 2012, so quite a few items coming back from that meeting regarding the feasibility report for improvements to Eden Prairie Road south of Riley Creek and the utility improvements as well. The council at that time held a public hearing and adopted a resolution ordering those improvements. However, there were several concerns and questions related to the assessments and the funding of the overall project, including discussion of possible projects related to Eden Prairie Road down to Flying Cloud Drive as well. So you also may remember that we came back to you then in workshop more recently. We discussed the update to this project, discussed an Eden Prairie Road improvement down to Flying Cloud Drive, and also discussed some changes in assessments. And a lot of that actually had to do with getting a lot more detail, especially as it related to MAC and what MAC may pay. But we also talked about some changes and alterations in the actual assessments that we were proposing. So we need to come back tonight with an amended feasibility report, and our city engineer Rod Rue is going to provide a brief presentation about this project and the changes that have occurred since it was last before you.
Thank you. Mr. Rue?
Thank you, Rick. Mayor and City Council members, as Rick mentioned, we had the feasibility report back in November, and some of the concerns that you had were related to the assessment. So over the last few months, we have been talking with MAC quite a bit, and also amending the feasibility study, which is being presented tonight. Some of the questions or some of the comments that Rick made regarding the south end, I'm not going to address those tonight. I think those were talked about at the workshop. And what's being presented tonight is basically the same thing that was presented at the workshop as well. So it should be fairly brief. So I'm not going to, unless there's questions, I won't talk about some of the street and sanitary sewer and drainage assessments that we talked about back in November and how those assessments were arrived. But what we will be talking about is some of the updates to the report. There were some minor updates, some of the assessment modifications, and also some adjustments in the project schedule. So as far as the report updates, the feasibility report, the preliminary assessment roll got much larger. Since we did the assessment roll in November, we've added the meadows at Riley Creek, and Eden Prairie Woods became a subdivision, so we added all those lots into the assessment roll. Didn't change anything, it just took those assessments for those underlying parcels and divided them up among all those lots. The total benefiting units increased, and that's mainly because of two parcels, or three parcels in particular. Two of them are MAC parcels, parcel which is listed below, parcels 29 and 29A, which I'll show you in just a minute. Those are two of the MAC parcels that are potentially have full development of residential densities. And in this case, we use 2 units per acre as an assumed density for this whole entire area. And that's been working with MAC. They've come up with some new rules, if you will, that are still in the process of being approved at the FAA and MAC itself. But there's potential for that. As well as parcel 2, which is a privately owned parcel that's kind of, and I'll show you that in a minute as well, that is able to be assessed for more units. So the two MAC parcels went from 24 units to 42 units potential for development, and then the Newharth piece, which is parcel 2, went from 4 units in the previous study to 12 units. And that's based on some information that we've been working with MAC on, that assuming some other things happen, there's a potential for that to happen. So. And then as far as the assessment modifications, with this report, we included $200,000 into the total assessment amount for estimated easement costs. And most of that is related to the MAC property. We have to buy quite a bit of easements from the MAC property to realign the road a little bit by the creek, and some temporary easements. The pond that's being proposed is all on MAC property, so we have an appraisal of that. We've reviewed that appraisal and are comfortable with that appraised amount, and that takes up most of that $200,000. And then what we did is, the main thing we did was average the lot unit assessments for all the fronting properties on Eden Prairie Road. So we used that same methodology that we talked about in November for the streets, if you will. If you recall, we had a 28-foot, equivalent 28-foot street that we assessed to the fronting properties, and then all the oversizing of that street, the extra 4 feet of width, and the creek crossing was all assessed to everyone within that area. So what we did then, to kind of make a little bit more equitable and uniform for those fronting properties, we took all the total assessments for all properties that front on Eden Prairie Road, took that total, divided it by the potential units of all those fronting properties, and came up with a unit assessment. And I'm noticing my graphic even here and on the thing is kind of washed out because it's been copied, and the yellow doesn't appear very well. So I will show you the next one, which kind of covers the whole situation. So the area in orange, I guess, are all the properties that have frontage on Eden Prairie Road. So all those properties were the totals of the street, utilities, and drainage costs were all totaled together and divided by all the potential units of those properties. That came up, doing that, came up with an assessment of just under $19,000 per unit, $18,926 estimated per unit. So all those properties shown in orange would be assessed $18,926 or whatever the actual cost is at the time per unit. This graphic also indicates kind of a summary of all the unit assessments for the entire area. So the green area, which is the ridge at Riley Creek, those properties are only being assessed for the extra street width. So their costs are $6,265 per unit. So all those have the same unit assessment. Properties in blue, they have the same street assessment for Eden Prairie Road, but they also have some sewer and water costs based on the fact that those areas need to be served through improvements on Eden Prairie Road, either that have been done by the developer or by our project. So theirs is slightly higher at $8,000 per unit. The yellow area is the same. Again, we add one more assessment to that area because those properties drain to the proposed pond down here. So all the properties in orange and yellow, their drainage is treated in the pond, or at least it all ends up in this pond before it ends up in the creek. So they have an additional assessment, which brings their total assessment per unit up to $11,174. And then back to the frontage properties have all those assessments plus the frontage assessment, and theirs is $18,926. And then just to talk a little bit about the schedule, we had some neighborhood meetings back in November. Before that November hearing, we also had a neighborhood meeting in May to talk about this amended feasibility study. And the same thing as we talked about at the workshop, council workshop in June. Tonight we're doing the amended report. We're still on schedule. We're still on schedule to open bids and award the contract yet in October or November of this year. We would start the construction. The main portion of the construction would be beginning in next year in June. The work that would occur this year would be mainly off-road and some grading, some private utility relocations that are quite extensive. And then we would start the work after we're allowed to kind of go into the creek area. We would start the creek construction and close the road from Prospect Road to the north and begin construction in June and have it completed by November for the entire project. There'd be some final cleanup work and final completion of the project in July of 2015. We would have the final assessment hearing in October of 2015. By then we would know all the final costs and figure out what those actual assessments are. And then the assessments would appear on tax statements in 2016. So With that,
Questions for
Yeah,
Mr. Rue? Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, so this isn't the final decision on those exact numbers per parcel, or is it more or less? The
Well,
final decision.
what this does is accepting or approving this amended feasibility study sets the groundwork that we would use to determine what the actual costs are at the time the final assessment hearing occurs in 2015. At that time, you could still change it if you desire. It's this would be how we would determine the costs and how we would bring that forward to the council at that time.
So you're saying that the blue and green and orange tiers could change for proportion of the cost? Or is
the
the
actual
proportions pretty much set tonight?
The methodology that we use to arrive at those would be set.
Okay,
And the
so,
amounts would change based on what the actual cost is.
right, but we are pretty much saying that blue pays less than green, pays less than yellow, pays less than orange. Also, how, some of these large parcels aren't developing yet that are along it. So I assume the owner has to pay for all the potential lots on their property. And some of these are going to be a fair distance away from, ultimately, from the road, almost as far back as some of your yellow parcels might be. But how do the individual owners of these, what are obviously larger parcels of land that people have their home on, are they assessed for it all at once, or do they have the ability to pay for this over 10, 20 years, or how does that work for them? Are there very few of those parcels that are individually owned? I'm sure some of them have a single-family home on them, though, do they not?
Yes, many of these have, even the bigger parcels have single-family homes on them. There are a few exceptions, that some vacant properties. But what we do is if there's no building or structure on the property, we would defer all of that, all of the assessment until at time of development.
What about the place where there's a single-family home
Yep.
on a very admittedly large piece of land, but that's what this area was?
Right, and then for properties like that do have a home on it, we would assess 1 unit of assessment,
Oh, okay.
and then the balance would be deferred with interest until they develop.
Okay.
Mr. Rue, when you talked a little bit at the beginning about MAC and the properties that they own in this area, and I guess my question is, with MAC, do they pay us for those assessments now, or do they pay later when the land develops? And then my next follow-up question is, if it's after the land were to develop, what happens if the FAA suddenly changes the rules about whether or not that land is buildable? And we've assessed them, I don't know, one parcel was $30-some thousand, another one was more than that.
Well, the total MAC assessment for all their parcels is just under $800,000. Under the previous one, it was about $550,000.
Okay.
They're willing to pay that, but in order for us, we cannot assess the MAC property, so we have to carry those costs until the time that they develop.
So if they aren't allowed to develop at some point in the future, then we're stuck with that money, that $800,000.
Yes. There's a portion of 29, parcel 29 and 29A that they could easily sell off. It's outside the runway protection zone, that they could sell off, and that was where we initially were in the previous study, where it was about 24 lots. Based on information that they've provided to us, they indicate that because what they're doing is that the whole runway protection zone area, they're looking at kind of a gross density in that area, not just per parcel, because what they normally allow is 1 unit per 3 acres. But in certain areas, they'll allow full density, but in other areas, they won't allow any density. So the net effect of that whole protection zone is still 1 unit per 3 acres.
Okay.
So it's likely that at least a portion of that will get sold, if not all of it.
Okay.
Just they have to go through some other approval processes.
Okay. I guess I don't like the fact that getting the money for the roads from MAC is not a sure thing, but on the other hand, I don't want to not assess them and add that to the burden carried by our residents. I don't want to do that. So I guess it's a risk we take.
Right.
Any other questions? Okay. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone from the audience that wants to address the council on this issue? No one? Okay.
Hearing none, I would move to close the public hearing and adopt the resolution approving the amended feasibility report for Eden Prairie Road, south of Riley Creek Street, and utility improvements.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Rue. Bryant Lake Property, Homestead Partners, Mr. Getchell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a request for a comprehensive guide plan change from parks and open space to low-density residential on .9 acres called the Bryant Lake property on the east side of Bryant Lake. Official notice of the public hearing was published in the August 8th edition of the Eden Prairie News and sent to 10 property owners. In this case, it's a request to re-guide that .9 acres, which is the buildable area of a parcel that's approximately 9.3 acres, from park and open space to low-density residential. The remaining 8.4 acres would remain open space. This lot was a lot of record created in 1980, and this designation of park and open space for the entire area was meant to protect the shoreland area, Bryant Lake. Did not include at that time the buildable portion of the lot, but that's coming forward right now. And the Planning Commission voted 6-0 to recommend approval of the project at their July 22nd meeting.
Okay, council, questions? Is a proponent here to make a presentation?
And I
or are
believe
we
the
fine?
project proponent is here to answer any questions
questions
that you might
Okay.
have.
Are there any
Unless
questions?
you want to add anything additional.
Okay, this is a public, I'll come back. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone from the audience that wants to address the council on this site off of Willowwood Road? Okay, Mr. Case, did you have a question or a comment?
We can close it if you want. And then
Okay.
we can have a
All right.
council discussion.
Okay, do you want to move to close the public hearing?
Sure, I would move that we close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
My only question is historically out of 1980, when it was created as park and open space, was a part of some type of a larger, we didn't have probably a PUD in that area, but some type of a larger project that intentionally sheltered this in exchange for something else. Were there any prior agreements on anything?
Your Honor, Councilmember Case, we're not finding anything to that effect, that there would have been some prior agreement that this would have to be preserved as park and open space.
But originally, was it sold, did it divide and become a legal entity with the division of everything around that cul-de-sac?
I think there's only one house on the cul-de-sac, isn't there, right now?
But there are still numbered lots, right? Yeah. Right? Correct?
Two, he says. Two houses. Okay.
Which numbered lots?
Yeah. So records would not indicate that that was the case? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Is there a motion? We've already closed the public hearing.
Okay. Move to adopt the resolution for a guide plan change from park and open space to low-density residential on 0.89 acres.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Motion passes. The third public hearing is the Cummins Grill House Certificate of Appropriateness. Mr. Getchell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, the last public hearing is COA, Certificate of Appropriateness, for the demolition of the asphalt-sided shed at the Cummins Grill House at 13600 Pioneer Trail. You may recall this is the site obviously is a designated heritage preservation site since 1997 with the city, and the property itself since 1982. And any time that the city would make an alteration, a change, material change in the property, the area, or a building, we must go through a certificate of appropriateness process with our Heritage Preservation Commission, public hearing, and bring that to the City Council. So we have had our Preservation Commission, I believe also our Historical Society, and others weigh in on the fact that the shed is no longer, well, first of all, it's in a terrible condition. I think you may recognize it as being kind of, I say saran wrapped or currently wrapped, and we don't necessarily see a future use for it in any way, shape, or form. And we're concerned about the condition of the building and the safety factors surrounding the building. So all parties agree that the building should be demolished. So the purpose is to hold the public hearing and to approve the appropriateness of the demolition of that shed.
Questions for Mr. Getchell? Is there anyone from the audience that wants to address the council on this issue? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
I would move we close the public hearing and adopt the findings of fact and approve certificate of appropriateness number 2013-01-004 for the demolition of an asphalt-sided shed.
Second.
Any discussion? Councilmember Wickstrom.
Yep, I just wanted to say one thing, and that is I feel so delighted that the process works so well because we're a certified local government. This is exactly how this should be, where the entities that understand historic preservation weigh in, and we take time to look at, then it comes to the council for a final decision. It's a really good process, and I'm very, very glad that all that work was done way in the past to be a certified local government, and I thank you, Janet, for your continued vigilance in helping us make sure that the things that need to go, go, but the things that need to stay, stay. So thank you, and thank the Heritage Preservation Commission.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Motion passes. Payment of claims. Is there a motion for approval?
Move approval. Payment of claims is submitted.
For a second?
Second.
Any items to question? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Aho.
Aye.
Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom.
Aye.
Councilmember Case.
Aye.
Councilmember Nelson.
Aye.
Mayor Terlukens.
Aye. We have two items under ordinances and resolutions. The first is the first reading of an ordinance amending City Code, Section 6.21, relating to snow and ice removal. Mr. Getchell.
I will turn this over to our Public Works Director.
Yes, Madam Mayor and City Council members, the ordinance tonight was originally written in 2006, and it deals with assigning the responsibility of snow removal on our trails and sidewalks to either the city or the property owner. And it made an attempt to describe verbally these geographic locations, and what we found is that doesn't work very well. It really works better if this is in a map where you can see, is this the north side of the road, south side of the road, where does it stop, where does it end? And since 2006, we've added probably miles of new trails and sidewalks, so that list has continued to grow. The ordinance tonight just represents these now with an official city map, much like this, which I've printed out, that we'll post on our website. It'll be available for the public. It allows people to get a better idea of exactly where it's a city responsibility versus a property owner responsibility. I would say, practically speaking, nothing's changing. This is how we've always operated. Most of the new trails and sidewalks that go in are city responsibility. They're along our arterials. They're gaps in sidewalks and trails that we've tried to fill in for years. In fact, Shady Oak Road is a good example this year. We're adding trails on both sides of that by UHG. Riverview Road with the Bella Reeve subdivision. We received the grant this year, and we're getting ready. Actually, I think it was awarded tonight to do the Mitchell Road sidewalk, the gap filling just north of City Center. So these are constantly being added to the system, and rather than coming back every time a new sidewalk or trail is installed and amending the code to identify who's responsible for that, we'd simply like to have that as part of the official map and record keeping of the engineering division. But most of those are falling on the hands of the city for responsibility. So simply, I look at this as more housekeeping than anything with this ordinance amendment, but it'll make it more clear for the public and for our staff having it tracked this way.
Okay. Questions? I have a question. You said you just kind of updated this. Do you have a up-to-date number on the number of miles of trail and sidewalk we have?
I do not with me tonight, but it's getting rather substantial. It's, I think trails and sidewalks are becoming more important when you talk about transportation, and they're finding themselves getting a lot more funding and attention than they have in the past, and it's really increasing the linear footage and miles that we have in our system. But I can certainly dig that number up and maybe send out an email to the city council.
I would love to see what that is, because it seems like last time we were given a number, it was just short of 100 miles of trails and sidewalk. It's got to be more than that now.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. Okay, and then my other question is, when new developments are coming in, like Rita Ridge and all, that are having trails, are we addressing that issue of who's responsible for maintenance at the time of the development? And if it is the resident who's responsible, how is that going to be conveyed to the resident?
Certainly. I wouldn't say that it is a part of a developer's agreement assigning responsibility, and maybe in a few cases, but I guess the way I've seen this operate here is that usually after the first snowstorm, if it's our responsibility, we're out there plowing it, and I think the residents realize that if it's not cleared after a snowstorm or two, they're realizing that that would be a homeowner's responsibility. We do get some phone calls inquiring about, whose responsibility is this. Far and away, most of them are city responsibilities.
Okay.
It seems like there's a few that do end up becoming homeowner responsibility, or they become trails that are redundant and might not need to be plowed. You have one on both sides of the road, or you have a trail and a sidewalk. Maybe one of those aren't being plowed. But generally, homeowners find out pretty soon after a snowstorm or two whose responsibility that falls.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Will this map online be able to be where you can, go in and zoom in on a specific neighborhood? Because often these things online, you look at what's there and you can't really tell for colors or for anything else, so that people will in fact be able to go and see, the sidewalk down halfway down the street, who is responsible for that, and deal with it however, or come to their great surprise that it's them and that's why it hadn't been done or whatever.
It will be high definition so that you can zoom in, and it won't be aerial where you can see your home or your
No.
property line, but it will be very clear. We don't have intentions of making it interactive where you can type in your address and it automatically zoom, but it will definitely be of the clarity that you can zoom in on your property and clearly define whose responsibility
And
it is.
this will be updated monthly, quarterly, yearly?
At least annually, but as we get new sidewalks in, it would be our intention that we try to keep this map up to date to the best that we can, but at
Good.
least annually.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a motion?
Well, I would move to approve the first reading of an ordinance amending City Code Chapter 6, Section 6.21 relating to snow and ice removal, and adopting by reference City Code Chapter 1 and Section 6.99, which among other things contain penalty provisions.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Motion passes. The next is a resolution in support of Southwest Transit Service. Mr. Getchell, do you want to introduce that?
I will. Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you know, much time and many resources have been put toward the potential future Southwest Light Rail Transit line. This issue relates to how that works with our Southwest Transit bus service. And as you know, as one of the three cities, Chaska, Chanhassen, Eden Prairie, that make up the Southwest Transit service, we have been trying to work closely with both the potential future of light rail transit coexisting with Southwest Transit. So the three cities have been working together to draft a position resolution laying out some of the guidelines for the potential LRT station that would possibly come into the Southwest Transit station. And this resolution you have in your packet, you have the one that was approved by the city of Chaska. I believe Chanhassen's still considering a resolution, and before you tonight is our resolution, which is identical to Chaska's. But we have with us tonight Len Simich and Dave Jacobson with Southwest Transit, and Len will provide us with an overview, and we're both here for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Rick. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Len Simich, CEO of Southwest Transit. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to address you this evening on two major threats, what our commission views as threats that are aimed at reducing the local control of your transit service. As you may be aware, Southwest Transit was created some 27 years ago through the joint powers of the three cities that Rick mentioned, Chanhassen, Chaska, and Eden Prairie. And as such, we're an extension of all three cities. Currently, the mayor and council member Aho sit on our commission, and in recent years we've been well served by council member Case as well as council member Wickstrom, and we thank you for your service. It's fair to say that Southwest Transit has had a strained relationship with the Met Council over the last few years, and many of you have heard me talk about what we feel are biased policies or not receiving our share of the state funding. That's not what I'm here to talk to you about this evening. There are, however, two very critical issues that could diminish the role Southwest Transit plays in our communities and take away the local control that many of you fought so hard to obtain. The first issue relates to BRT, or Bus Rapid Transit. BRT is defined in many different ways, but just giving you the quick overview, BRT is a service that has a high level of all-day frequency, limited stops, provides a time advantage during peak hours, using things such as shoulders as well as high occupancy vehicle lanes like those found on 394 or 35W, and has amenities like transit stations to catch a bus or to connect to other services. So in other words, BRT is basically the same service Southwest Transit provides today without the level of all-day frequency. Now, the level of all-day frequency is something that we look at and we monitor all the time. Right now the demand isn't there, nor is the funding, but this is something that we would continue to look at and strive to provide in the future if that demand did exist. The main issue that we see is if a corridor is designated BRT, then the control really goes away from the commission, the Southwest Transit Commission, to the Metropolitan Council, because that is the way that the rules and the policies state that today. This is something that our commission as well as our customers strongly oppose. The second critical issue relates to LRT access into Southwest Station. This is something that not only impacts you in Eden Prairie, but because of the level of services that come through the Southwest Station to points west, primarily Chanhassen and Chaska, it's important to those cities as well. The main concern is if we are forced to reduce the service levels, force transfers, and to have our operating budget cut because of LRT operation, then transit operated in Eden Prairie as well as west will be negatively impacted. With the issues currently surrounding the Southwest LRT in St. Louis Park, the LRT project office has asked our commission to enter into a memo of understanding and asked us to outline under what conditions would we grant access into Southwest Station. Since this appears to be our only leverage with the Metropolitan Council, the Southwest Transit Commission has put forward a list of requirements that I believe is outlined in the staff report and in the resolution. I'm here tonight, just as I have been in Chaska and Chaska, to answer any questions that the council may have and ask for your support in the form of resolution backing the commission's position as it relate to BRT and LRT. Now I want to be clear, we're not taking an approach to BRT or LRT. We just want to make sure that the control is kept locally and that the transit needs of the communities we serve are maintained and the level and standards we have established over the past 27 years stay in place. So thank you again for this opportunity. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Len. I just wanted to make a few comments too. This resolution is really aimed at making sure that we continue to have the excellent service of Southwest Transit within the city of Eden Prairie. We've been really lucky to have that as an asset in this community. It's served us very well with general ridership of close to 1 million a year in the last few years, great state fare service, and rider satisfaction rates that are much higher than typical bus service. But we know that despite ridership, traffic congestion always had remained a big issue for Eden Prairie residents. And we learned that in surveys, we learned that in town hall meetings, it came up frequently. So when the county approached us about studying the possibility of light rail along the Southwest Corridor, we needed to get involved. We needed to investigate options. And during those early years of county leadership on the issue, we learned that a Southwest project had a high likelihood of getting federal dollars and that it could attain acceptable ridership numbers without cannibalizing current bus service. In fact, that was a requirement at that time for federal funding. Now that the project has turned over to the Met Council and the Southwest LRT Project Office, and new funding guidelines have been issued for the New Starts program, I'm increasingly feeling like we may lose our local express service in an effort to keep those ridership numbers high for LRT. This is disappointing, as there's been so much talk about having a multimodal transportation system in the region, which to me means giving people options. And I'm increasingly feeling, based on Met Council action and committee discussions, that Eden Prairie residents will not have any more options. Right now, we can drive or we can take the bus. My fear is, with some of the direction that things seem to be going, that now our options will be drive or take LRT. The bus option will disappear. What have we gained? We haven't become a multimodal service area with options for residents. We've just changed what those options are. We still only have two options. We know the majority of our riders would prefer to take the bus. They have a ride relatively interrupted by stops. It's quicker than light rail is likely to be. The seats are more comfortable. We have Wi-Fi in some of our buses, and the bus takes them close to where they currently work. This is a community asset that is critical that we, as representatives of our community, try to protect. Southwest Transit prides itself on being more than a transit service when it comes to the community it serves. Many transit agencies can provide basic services, maybe not as good as Southwest, but nonetheless they could provide the basic service. But Southwest has always really viewed itself as integral to the community, and that's why they do things that may or may not happen were we covered by a larger agency. For example, working with the city and its seniors, providing transportation for special events, Twins games, holiday programs, educational outings, the popular shopping bus that we all know about. Southwest works with the city, its business community, and civic organizations to provide special services for its citizens. An example includes the recent shuttle service that was provided for the Mandy Matula fundraiser, the Eden Prairie Foundation annual gala, and the upcoming Eden Prairie Historical Society event, and many chamber events within the city, as well as historical tours and the annual real estate forum. These are not things Metro Transit is going to do for us. Southwest has worked with many local businesses to provide parking and transportation options and has provided emergency response service on numerous occasions. They've partnered with local food shelves, providing food collected during annual drives. They always try to purchase goods and services locally when possible. Southwest is the organization that developed Southwest Station, that not only brought food and housing options to the city, but has helped increase the city's tax base in a positive way. And finally, each summer, Southwest employs 25 to 30 youth workers to perform a variety of tasks like bus washing, detailing, landscape work, painting, building improvement. All of those youth come from within our communities. So this community support, as I said, is unlikely to come from a larger agency that might cover this community should we lose the ability to serve. I mean Southwest. I've served on that board since '94. Should we lose the ability to provide service to Eden Prairie and not even have BRT except with Metro Transit. The express service we provide Eden Prairie riders to downtown is extremely valued by them, and I think it's really imperative that we try to protect that. It's like Mr. Simich said, it's not an anti-LRT position. It's just let's preserve and protect a wonderful, wonderful community asset that has served the community well for years. So, questions or comments?
I would just say that I totally agree that you did a very nice job summarizing it, and I just make sure that residents know that we support their option to ride the bus, and that it is important and critical that we retain that service no matter what happens to Southwest LRT. That we really want that option for them because I think they value it so much.
Councilmember Wickstrom?
Yes, and Mayor, you have such a great perspective because you have served for almost 20 years on the commission, and I think you have seen it grow and develop and continue to increase the excellence of service. So I absolutely agree with what you said, and I thought it was very articulate. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Is there a motion?
I move to adopt the resolution in support of Southwest Transit Services.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for coming,
Thank you.
Lynn.
Thank you.
Under reports, I have one item that I wanted to bring up because I told a citizen that I would. As you know, about 2 months ago, there was a big article in the Star and Tribune about garbage, trash receptacles, and people leaving them out by the street, people having them unscreened, and the unsightliness and all. And I immediately heard from one person in person that in passing just mentioned that they have a problem with a neighbor. I also received an email from somebody that said that they had a problem in their neighborhood and they would like to see the issue addressed. So I thought I would just ask Mr. Getcho to provide us with a copy of what the current ordinance is, which he has done. We have that on our desk. And ask if from your perspective you feel any need to change this ordinance or make it a little more strict. I mean, I'm all in favor of not having any more government than we possibly have to have, but if this ordinance strikes you as something that can currently address the problem, as long as, one of the biggest problems is there's a problem in a neighborhood and people don't report it. Well, we're not going around looking for people that have garbage cans out, so we don't know unless people notify us. So do you think we just need to make sure that this is communicated to the public and that it's enforced when we're contacted, or do you think it needs to be made a little more strict?
And maybe, Mayor, if I can add the probably the main issues that I've heard as well, similar thoughts, would be that if you're, first of all, the container, there's that 24-hour time frame for where it can be out there. I think we talked about that at the last meeting. It also, if the container is in the front yard setback, it needs to be screened. However, in the side yard setback, it does not need to be screened. So I think the thought people have is, in front of the garage, it needs to be screened. But if you slide it to the side of the garage, it's now in the side yard setback. It doesn't need to be screened, and yet it can be viewed from the street. So that's the issue. And I think now we have the waste containers, we have the recycling containers, and now we're getting, I believe, the new orange organic containers. So we have a number of containers. And so that's one thought. And then the other thought is that we currently have a 20-foot setback, and maybe if there is some exchange for a screening requirement on the side, our zoning administrator has talked about a 10-yard setback being feasible as well. So those are some thoughts that staff has come up with. I thought the thing that we may want to research a little bit is how big the impact might be. So we could use local newspaper, city website, City Connect to float that concept of requiring a screening in the side yard, more strict language as the mayor mentions, or at a minimum some more education. And finally, as the mayor said, we do enforce on a complaint basis. We don't, that's how we enforce, following complaints.
So anybody's comments? Did you hear from any of the people in the community? Mr. Case, Councilmember Case.
I did not. I just am looking at the second statement in our current code, and I'm thinking that even neighborhoods that are half acre, which are the largest, generally the largest lots, they're 15-foot setbacks on the sides. So the whole concept of 20 doesn't work almost anywhere in the whole city unless you're on a corner lot.
Mm-hmm.
So then we get into a whole situation, or what are we building some kind of a barrier from where? From the front only, now from the side. There's no place to put it, so that trash can goes then into the garage, which is workable for lots of people, but not all garages, right? Or around to the back, and then there's no sidewalk. I mean, it gets into, no pun intended exactly here, or slightly, but the can of worms that I don't know where, I don't know that many people could meet the current code if we enforce it everywhere, and if we start to tighten it, I think that gets a little bit ridiculous. But I mean, the general idea is from the street, we don't want to have some kind of a nuisance. So, if that's generally working, I guess I'd like to know that too. I mean, if occasionally if there's an abuse or someone goes on vacation, but if it's generally working around the whole city, then it's generally working.
Yeah, then let's not spend time on it. Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, I haven't heard from anyone either, but obviously as you drive around town, you do see, but it's often in the side yard. And I agree that 20 foot from the side yard needs to be amended simply because it's not possible for an awful lot of people where their garage is, near the edge of their house. I think there needs to be a little flexibility with this for, say people who live on a curve. So if you have it screened from most of the directions, but not from, if you look at the right angle, you could see something. There has to be a little bit of flexibility for someone who is in fact trying to screen. And certainly there are a lot of cul-de-sacs and curvy streets in town. Most people do keep them in their garage, but not all. Mm-hmm. And there should at least be some reasonable attempt, I would think, if it's to the side of the garage and that's viewable, to at least have something in the front of it, even if somebody coming from down the street could still see the side. Mm-hmm. I don't think we need to have a fence all the way around garbage cans, but something from the front side would be reasonable.
It's a tough issue when you live a place with lots of snow. Mr. Aho.
Personally, I don't think that changing the code and tightening it is going to make any difference. I think it's really more of a matter of education. My guess is that the people that have them out and visible probably just aren't aware of the code. And so I think, maybe we should do a little bit more in trying to educate the residents on what our current code is, and then they'd probably be more compliant. And I think we'd probably have less of a complaint issue.
Well, how about this then? Put an education effort in place after spring. I don't want to force people to do something when they're dealing with snow. It's hard. But if we did an effort in the spring to educate people a little bit better on this, maybe not really spend a lot of staff time on this. I just, told this gentleman that I would bring it up to see if there was appetite to do anything. If you want to throw it out there for City Connect to get some feedback from the public to see if they perceive it as an issue, and then we can take it from there. Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Wickstrom.
Yes, I have, I guess you'd call it a resident concern as well. And it was brought up when 2 weeks ago at the Night to Unite when I was at Pioneer Village. And it was just a great night of a lot of fun and families. And but there was this concern that surfaced from several residents. And if you know where Pioneer Village is, it's in proximity to Flying Cloud Airport. Mm-hmm. And these young families were a bit alarmed by the number of crashes of aircraft recently in and around the Flying Cloud Airport. They brought it up as a concern, and I thought that I would like to bring it up here tonight to help our residents understand if we're in conversation about, how we make ourselves safe, and are there any actions that we're taking in terms of having a task force talk about it, whatever they might be. But I also wanted to point out, and I did point out to the residents, that the airport is truly not within the City of Eden Prairie's jurisdiction in terms of its operation. But we are concerned because they are our neighbors and have been for a very long time. So if the city manager could address this and just, I think they would feel more comfortable knowing that we've been thinking about it and we're also concerned.
Yeah, we are. I think that even if, and again, I'm not an FAA investigator or can speak on the details of all the incidents that occurred, but from the city's perspective, we have excellent communication with the airport, and our public safety has a very close role with the airport, and it's our understanding that these cases, while you don't like to see 2 crashes in 2 weeks or 3 crashes in 2 years, that they are attributed to those particular issues, those pilot situations, and there isn't anything that we've been told currently with the airport, the design of the airport, the operation of the airport, that we should be concerned about. Nonetheless, as you mentioned, we have a Flying Cloud Airport Advisory Commission. We have a group that meets at least quarterly, made up of our residents and attended by members of MAC as well in the city, and this will be, it plans to be an issue on that agenda. So the point of, are we discussing this? Are we getting the necessary information and talking about it? The answer would be yes.
Thank you.
You know, it strikes me that we got an email or a letter from former commissioner of our Flying Cloud Airport Commission, Rick King, who's now on MAC,
Right.
who offered to come out and address us if we want to hear from them. Maybe this is something he could talk to us about.
Certainly. So we could have our MAC representative covering the entire area as well come in for an update. I think the letter we got in that case was related to the new the operations for the Minneapolis airport. That doesn't affect us as much as some of our neighbors, but we could certainly do that. We can certainly have him out to do an update for our city.
Okay. And I would like to find out if that does affect our
city.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and also I'm thinking that if we're going to have someone come out and have this conversation, it might be nice to open that up and make sure the public knows that they can come and raise their concerns and ask questions. So it'd be great if it could be announced in the paper, on the website.
Sure. Good idea.
Get
Certainly.
the word out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. The final item on the agenda is a report from our aquatic director on the design process for the pool.
Thank you, Your Honor, council members. What I wanted to do tonight is kind of bring you up to speed with what we've been doing. The last time I was here and talked to you all as a council, it was back in May about this subject. And so we've done a lot of work. A lot of things have happened. I know that you've read quite a bit in the paper. And also some of you have attended some of our public meetings. So although I feel like you're very up to speed on the project, I want to just let you know what we've been doing and then what you can expect coming soon. So tonight I'll just walk you through some of the background. Going back to our council meeting in May, is when we presented the feasibility study and the council said, move forward with the next step, which, to remind you again, is really 70% design. At that point, we will have some decisions to make about going forward, not going forward, making some alterations. So we began that process with HGA. May 28th, a project initiation meeting. Our process with HGA has really been in a workshop setting format. So in almost every one of these meetings that I reference, you're looking at a 2 to 4 hour segment of the day attended by multiple staff, multiple consultants in order to make headway on a good design. So after that, we had our first master planning to make sure that we were taking the feasibility study and taking it to that design process and really walking back through some of the assumptions that were made in more of a general layout and starting to get to how do you put this into something that could be buildable, could be more estimatable from a cost standpoint. We did walk through quite a few things on that workshop number one. We looked at the space program and what would fit in certain areas and did that still make sense. After that, we moved on in the end of July to the workshop number 2 of master planning, and we had 3 separate meetings that day with different constituents. So we met with the high school coaches and their athletic director and talked through what this facility design would mean to them, how they would use it, get some of their input, depth of water, height of starting blocks, a lot of their individual concerns. We also met with the Fox Jets and their coaches to get that swim team perspective. And then we had a group we call the internal user panel. It's really a group of people that had kids in swim programs that were lap swimmers that use the aquatics facility currently for many different uses. A lot of them had kids that have gone through the swim program. So really a good understanding from a real general user's perspective too. And so we were able to get their feedback. We also kept working with the architectural team that day too. We as city staff have taken quite a few tours and really looked at some of the best practices that are out there. We've also seen some poor practices that we wouldn't want to replicate if this were to go forward. So we shared that with the architect team, and actually they moved on today where they and a couple of the consultants went and revisited those sites and looked at some of the things that we specifically had pointed out to them. Farther on in July, we went to our third master planning, and again, this is part of the design segment, and we redefined and refined the base and really talked back with our users about what they had told us. We now reflected it in the design plans. August 5th, we were at the Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Commission, which was open to public, open for feedback. I know that a couple of you were there and were able to hear some of that feedback. Then we moved on from that master planning phase to get into a little more detailed design. We had a couple workshops where we were really starting to look at dimensions, how many treadmills would fit in certain places of a dry land training, what would some of that traffic flow look like, and really dived into structurally is some of it possible with what we have now. So that really started getting a lot of that design detail that allowed RJM to do some more cost estimates, and that's maybe some new news to you as a council. We've asked RJM as a part of the project to join the planning team, and so they've sat in on some of these meetings and workshops, and they communicate very closely with HGA to help solidify some of the cost estimates. And what's really nice about that is they are the builders in the industry, and they can really tap into some of, at this point, they haven't gone to working with the pricing with some of the subs, but they're using some of the past industry pricing that they feel is appropriate to let us know that the design that's starting to take shape, does that still meet some of the dollar figures that we had estimated in the feasibility study? And if not, why not? And are there things that we could do to make a change in the design that would affect that and impact it? So along the way, as we're re-updating these design plans, there are marks along the way that get us to, are we still on track in a financial sense, as well as a usability and a design sense? And to date, so far, we're there. Now, what's recently been issued to RJM just this past week is the 50% completion of the designs, and so we'll get another cost analysis at the 50% mark, and then, so that will be early September, we'll get that back, and then we'll get the last and final cost estimate towards the end of October when the 100% of the 70% of the design is completed. So we've had a chance, Kevin McLeay, you see his name there, aquatic design consultant out of Kansas City, to really look at some of those pool depths, pool standards, sizes of lanes, really get real detailed, even to the type of chlorination, to how do you service the multiple pools that would be going on, and he's really helped us take a really good and what I would say a confident look from somebody that's very tight in the pool industry, not just in the architectural industry. We really started to see some of the exteriors, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the plans and some of the 3D images that start to develop the exteriors. So the diagrams to date, this shows you when we were at the feasibility study, and as we get a little bit farther, I can easily provide these in views that are easier to see, has more of the details of the depth and things like that. But when you go back to the feasibility study, we had 15 lanes that were lap swimmable. One was 12 and one was 3. As we thought about that and tested it with some of the user groups, it actually makes sense with the same amount of space to go not with a 12 and 3, but to go with an 8 and 8. And we shrink the lanes just a little bit, but we don't end up with more space, but a better configuration. It also gives us those a deeper water pool, which gives us some more flexibility, and you also end up with multiple temperatures of pools too. So thinking of the satisfaction of different types of user groups, that's even another benefit. So you look at the phase 1 on the right side, phase 2 on the left side, we start to see a little bit different shapes than what we saw in the feasibility study. All of that driven by what we've learned, what we know, and also starting to get in what fits on the site. We know we have a fairly tight site, and to be able to integrate it, we're working with some really tight dimensions. This one also shows kind of that top level. We had mentioned before, if we take advantage of some of the roof space that's available to expand some of the fitness area, expand some of the studios. So that's still in play, and the configuration and sizes of those have been changing. Some of that's been related to what we're learning about the structural foundations that we have in place and what can be supported. But it's coming together nicely, and I think after we had a workshop again today, and I think after today we're going to see some pretty detailed design plans that will be pretty set somewhat in stone because of where columns and things are, and so we'll give you a better idea of what that looks like. These are just some of the design concepts. I know we've talked about them before, and HGA has talked about them a couple times, but to be able to integrate the building in as best we can, both internally and externally. And you're going to start to see that as we get another month or so. All of those design plans and concepts will start to take more three-dimensional lives. They're also looking at different types of materials, whether it's windows, thicknesses of windows. How do you integrate the natural light, but also in a pool environment that can be difficult? How do we, screen things from the front, but also it needs to be a very, nice looking and appearance is going to be a big part of this, because when you deal with a big volume, like a big pool volume, architecturally, we want to make sure we do some things that it just doesn't look like a big warehouse, and it won't, and they've shown us some pretty good samples of how we can work with that. So from a diagram standpoint, you're just starting to see this is kind of the front door. You're looking at to the left of that where there's a meeting room, dry land training to the left of that. So you're seeing where we can let some natural light in, where we can have some walls where the entrance will be. This is actually looking from Valley View, looking to the side. We have seen these window slats change now, so they're testing what if we did windows almost floor to ceilings, and depending on the interior treatment that we would use, that may be more than possible, and take advantage of the natural light but control it when we need to. So we're starting to see more of that. So this is still fairly schematic in nature. This is actually the view where you're looking from the back and almost from the school area, so you're starting to see where the slide works in, and then these are all three of the different elevations mixed in. So what are the next steps? The week of August 19th, which is just happening now, RGM is taking a look at the 50% design and what the pricing will look like. That's going to take a couple weeks to come back. We'll get that the week of September 3rd. We'll review those, and if we need to make some scope adjustments and talk about what are some of those things that kind of keep us in that pricing line that we talked about earlier, that's where we'll start to make some of those decisions. Week of September 16th, we've got another workshop. So there's more deliberation to happen and more reconfiguration. We'll have our consultants in place to talk with us, look at more of those exterior designs. What are some of the materials that we might use? Also, we're really starting to hone in on what is that air handling, the HVAC, the pool, how are we going to make use of the pumps, and some of those things that we might be able to integrate with some of the green technology and energy efficiency. We have our facility staff with us at every one of the meetings, and they're along on some of the facilities tour. They were looking at St. Thomas's newer pool today and how they integrated the pumps and didn't have to stack some things, and so there's some concepts that they're pretty excited about, seeing can we integrate that and help with some of the energy efficiency long term, because as we all know, this, like an ice arena, is a high energy use facility, so there might be some things up front that we can do that will help us with that long term. Also, the week of the 16th, we meet back with the user groups again and start to test some of the new maybe configurations. We even get into, at that point, we'll start to look at the locker room designs and ask them to give us their thoughts and opinions on maybe the size, style of lockers. We'll be at that level of detail at that point. Number of showers, where hooks might be for backpacks, if that's the way that some of their kids use that. So another opportunity to keep making some progress on the design. Into October, we get to about that 95% complete, and that's going to allow them to send it out for really some good and accurate, timely bidding at that point. Then once we're into October, we'll get back and review those final cost estimates before we get back with the Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Commission, which ends up to be November 4th. Then we come back to you on the 19th of November to present to you what our design details are and what we think the cost estimate is, and then to make that decision, where do we go from there. Excuse me. A couple of things that we're thinking about and starting to really work on that I just want you to know about and maybe start to think about how would you react, what suggestions would you have for us. But certainly funding methods, we'll have more suggestions, more details of how that would work once we come back in November. However, we're working on the grant with Hennepin County. So that's a max of $350,000. So you'll see us in a couple weeks come before you because we need a resolution to even apply for that. So not that we'll know in November if we received it, but it needs to be turned in. So we'll get that in the hopper. We can always turn it down if we decide we don't want to move forward with the project. We've had initial meetings with the Foxjets where they have taken a concept like the Hockey Association did. They're still refining it, so not ready yet, and they're not ready yet to share that, but fairly soon we'll likely come back before you and say, here's what their proposal is. Are you comfortable as a council to allow them to go out and either begin recruiting, or we also want you to feel comfortable with what their methods and suggested strategies are for recruiting funding sources. So that's something to think about. One of the things that we'll also tell you in November is our best guesstimate of what would it be as a savings if we let the whole project at one time. And there are some savings to doing that. We know that not just because we know that if you give a bigger contract out to a contractor that they, will look at some of the economies of scale or that they'll adjust in the mobilization. But we'll also present to you some reasons and findings why we believe, and we'll try our best to quantify that. You never know it unless you test it in the market with bidding two different ways. But I think there is a number that we would feel comfortable telling you, especially when we get to November, because there are some walls that can be built out and around all at once. There's some utilities that can be built all at once. And so there's definitely a cost benefit to doing it all at once. Is it enough to make us want to do it that way, or to try it two different, a phase one and a phase two separately bid? We'll give some thoughts and some options on what that might mean and how much of an estimated savings. And again, we're using RJM, we're using the architects to come up with those numbers on some really good experiences that they've had. So we'll be able to demonstrate that to you. Also thinking about construction delivery method, would we use a general contractor, let it all out sort of at once, or would we look at how we did the 2007 remodel of the community center and use a contractor like an RJM who would be a contract manager for us or a construction manager for us for a fee. And we'll also give you some of the cost benefits, one versus the other on a project of this type, and how, if we do move forward, how would we want to move forward. And then also, as I mentioned too, the bidding options that we would have if we did elect to go forward, and also the cost savings. So a lot of work to happen, but I really wanted to at least impress upon you the amount of work that's been done, the multiple public meetings, user groups, and still, even today when we met, we're doing things like, as we look at where a door entrance is to a locker room, and saying, what if we spun that around on the other side? Would that make, and all of a sudden as you talk that through and you say, well, here's how the swim club, here's how the parents enter, here, and it all makes even better sense than what was before. So these things are evolving, but as I've seen projects evolve, it's going in a really good direction. We've been really happy with HGA and their method of going through this process, and feel good about the amount of input that we as staff and also the user groups have had too. So with that, if you have any questions, be happy to answer them.
Thank you. A very good report. You've made a lot of progress. I appreciate it. It sounds like you've spent a lot of time on this. I didn't mean to call you the aquatic director.
Oh, that's
I know that you do have a other job as a park and rec director. So.
Got a great job too.
Okay. Councilmember Aho.
I'd just like to say that, I've been following this very closely, and I think it's a very important project to our community, and I appreciate all the opportunity that we've given our residents for input into the process, and I see that we're continuing that same feeling, and so I think that's very, very smart that we do that.
And plenty more of that to come. We keep, as we can, updating the website with the latest design plans. They keep evolving, so it's not always the very next day. We're not that far away from having the 3D scaled model out of balsa wood that we'll have in the lobby or on the front desk at the community center for people to look at, and being able to post some of these design plans. And certainly if people have comments, it's our staff at the community center is so visible and interactive that it's pretty easy. You can catch us online, you can send us the email, you can talk directly with staff. I don't have any worries that we won't get people able to give us the thoughts and feedback that they might have.
Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, I do have, there's one other cost piece of this that I hope that we're going to keep this on track as fast as possible, and that's the bonding piece of this. Because it makes, with the potential for municipal bond rates going up, even hearing about this in November makes me a little bit nervous. Yeah, I'd almost rather pull it back 3-4 weeks if there's any way to do it. It doesn't sound like there is. But if this, with the amounts of money we're talking about bonding, if it goes up 1%, that's a huge amount of money to the community. Whereas Speedo, if we're not going to go through the referendum route, which I don't think we are, then getting the whole thing, just at least general numbers that we can bond off of fast, becomes a very big cost estimator. And I don't want to let this go on and on and on to the point where we can't bond fast and get the low rates that we're getting right now, and instead pay 1-2% more, which will skyrocket the costs.
Yeah, that's we feel good about the progress that we've made and the timeline that we're on. We should easily be able to hit that. Like you mentioned, it would be difficult to do it faster than that, just with the work that needs to be done and the timing. November council, only one meeting, and so that we could be ready right after the November 4th Parks Commission meeting, but given council meeting schedules, it takes us to the 19th. But even that still wouldn't, if the project were to move forward, that wouldn't prevent us from being on track to finish the design and get bids early in 2014, which is really about the fastest track that this can be on, given public notification and the actual design details that would be left to do.
Will we be able to estimate costs enough where you could,
Absolutely.
before that time where you could actually assume the amount of bonding you're probably going to need and at least go out with an initial bonding?
When we get to November 19th, or even at the very, very end of October, one of the major points of this process to get to 70%, although it isn't something that you could put out for bid and the winning bidder could use those plans to do construction, 70% gets us to a point where most contractors would feel comfortable at least giving us a good bid or estimate. And that's what, part of our JM's job will be, is that November timeframe when we come back before you, and actually on November 4th when we come before the Parks Commission, we'll share those numbers with them, and so that'll help them make their recommendation to the council on next steps. But we, short of going out for bid, which there's always, an unknown to that, but I would have a lot of confidence in the number that we get as an estimate in November from HGA and RGM, what their projection is and the methods that they've used by talking with contractors, specifically in the areas of glass and dirt work and pool and construction. I would be really confident that that is a very close number to what it will cost, so that if the council says continue with HGA to get to the 100% design to be able to go out to bid by the end of December, so that it goes out to bid in January, when those bids come back, it's going to be close. I mean, that's close to what we got to in November. That's really one of the things we've hired both of those organizations for, is that expertise. Now, you're never exactly on once you go out to bid. You know, lately our estimates have been a few percents over, but, you know, it's hard to guarantee what that would be. But that will be a close number in November.
Thank you. And it's a report. We don't need any action on it. Thank you so much for that. Any other business to bring before the council? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
I'm home.